Welcome to Family Office World Live. I'm very excited to have Dan Ives here. Dan, welcome.
Great to be here.
So, a couple things. One, this is going to be fascinating because we live in different worlds. I watch you on TV a lot, and you're an expert on AI, and the whole world is talking about AI. It's going to transform the world. It'll be the internet, probably on steroids. And you mentioned before you were in the second inning. Earlier this week, you were on CNBC discussing that we're in the second inning in the AI revolution. That being said, Sam Altman recently called AI a bubble. I want to get your perspective on that, but here's how I kind of want to format this. We're going to have there's going to be a lot of people on this. If you've got any questions, just put them on chat and we'll get to as many as we can. I want to start this with taking maybe 10 minutes, Dan, talking about kind of AI, the little bit of the background, where we are today, but most importantly, where you see this going forward. And what's interesting and how it parallels to my world, I invest alongside 124 family offices. And as you said, we're in the second inning in the evolution of AI. I also believe we're in the second inning in the evolution of family offices. So while AI is going to transform everything, I think family offices are going to fundamentally change the way things are financed. So if you take a minute and maybe a little bit of background to kind of how we got here, where we're at, but most importantly, where we're heading with AI. I'll then talk about a little bit about family offices. We'll link them together. And during the process, anybody who's got any questions, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. And look, it's great to be here, and thanks for the invite. I think you do a phenomenal job, obviously, on the family office side, and I follow it well. And I think look, I'm excited to just sort of talk about the convergence, especially when it comes to AI. I mean, for me, look, covering tech stocks since late 90s, I've seen a lot of trends in my career, front and center. And some have ultimately there's been hype and maybe didn't meet that. I mean, I think we saw some of that in dot-com bubble, and obviously the burst. And in my opinion, starting in like 2021, 2022, we were starting with a lot of the developers and engineers talking to around the world. There was a view that we are almost on a breakthrough point when it came to what I'll call true AI. And if you go back 2022, it was actually a brutal year for the market, because the interest rates fed. Market was down huge, but yet underneath the covers, there was, especially when it came to NVIDIA, obviously a company we follow so closely, really a potential breakthrough when it came to GPU, and obviously when it came to chips. But then on the other side, it was really what was happening with Altman and OpenAI. And you're really starting to see the formation, obviously, of ChatGPT and a lot of the models, the LLMs that were starting to get built. And to me, it all kind of converged when, early 2023, Microsoft taking the huge stake in OpenAI. And I think at that moment, we talked about it like, okay, the revolution's kicked off. This is it. Now, I think at first, the market, it's taken time for the market to react, especially when you go back to those first few months, 2023. But now, as the power of AI has all started to form, you realize on the enterprise side, it's not just transformational. It's building a new economy, and it started with NVIDIA and Microsoft. But our view is that this is a fourth industrial revolution that we're living in. And it's about second, third, fourth derivatives as it plays out across chips, software, consumer, and what I ultimately view as the holy grail, which is physical AI when it comes to autonomous and robotics. Because look, my view is one of every 10, 12 households is going to have a robot. 20% of transportation is going to be autonomous when we look at the next 3-4 years. And that's why we're so bullish, because I think there's a tech bull market that rages on at least for another 2 or 3 years.
Fascinating. When you talk about AI a lot, you talk about it. What's the questions that you're getting the most? In other words, is it sort of like it almost is like the internet in what 1995, 1998, whatever it was, where you know things are going to change. I'm a layperson when it comes to AI, but I just know things will fundamentally be different. The world will be fundamentally different in five years. What questions are you being asked?
I think the biggest questions that I get asked are like use cases on the enterprise. When are they going to continue to almost expand and multiply? And I think we actually have started to see that in the last few months. Obviously, Palantir being front and center. Is this a bubble? How does this compare to like my experience in the late 90s? I think it's dramatically different because, back then it was all about the business models and the future and what could happen. Here, it's the computing power is there. I mean, 60% of data is untapped. And you're seeing it play out in front of your eyes, not just on enterprise, but it's being funded by 350 billion capex from big tech. But that's just the start. Only 4% of enterprise in the United States have gone down the AI path. And my view is like, okay, it's about global. Europe, zero. Asia ex China, basically zero. Middle East just starting. Sovereigns haven't even started. Then there's a lot of questions about like, what are the next drivers? CapEx, like, can it sustain? Is there a point? And I think that's why maybe some trepidation this week, like Altman bubble, Zuckerberg and Meta kind of like freezing hiring, like, maybe tweaking things in terms on their AI unit. So there's so much excitement, but also I think there's nervousness too, right? Because investors snake bitten still. If you go back, 25 years, is this another bubble? And I think those are the biggest questions that I get.
From how it's going to revolutionize everything to me, and again, I'm the layperson when it comes to this. It seems like healthcare, like finding cures for diseases and things like that. To me, that's where it's going to be most transformational. Is that fair, or how would you agree or disagree with that?
I think healthcare is going to be one of those verticals that's it's going to look completely different 5-7 years from now, based on the data, the robotics, the way AI is going to play a role in terms of surgeries, data, doctors, medicine, insurance. I think the financial field is going to be dramatically different in terms of what we see in terms of transactions, understanding customer data, getting things through so quick where it's really going to be AI agents. Like my view is like when it comes to things, let's say like getting a mortgage approved. If you think about that process and the bureaucracy and anyone that's done it, I mean, my view is like 3-4 years from now, a lot of it is going to be AI agents talking to each other on each side. I think government's going to be massively transformed when it comes to AI, especially on the military side. That's a big area in terms of Pentagon, and we see, from Army and Navy, Marines, and everything that we see there in terms of huge initiatives. And I think verticals across the board, because I think the whole auto industry is going to be transformed. I think factories are going to be transformed because of my view of humanoid robots and how that's going to play. And obviously, that's a big focus of like Tesla and NVIDIA, but there's so many private companies going down that route.
And you think that you believe we're in the second inning in the evolution of this, correct?
Oh, I mean, I think this is a decade-long trend. Now, anytime you say second inning, like look at the stocks, look what they've done. How could you say second inning? I just view it as like you're gonna have 3 to 4 trillion at a minimum spent over the next few years on the build out of AI infrastructure, apps, energy. I mean, look, you're gonna need 5 to 6 times more data today, which ultimately is going to generate. There's more data centers under construction today than active data centers. The power demands are going to be 6 to 8 times. That's why, like, if you look at like our Ives AI30, that's why we have nuclear in there, Aqua, names like GE Vernova and others, because it's not just about tech, it's about shifting to what's ultimately going to be on the energy side too. And consumer hasn't even played out. When you think about like ChatGPT, that's an appetizer. I mean, my view is in the consumer, eventually, like over the next few years, like you're gonna have 100 apps on Apple App Store that will be AI, focused, healthcare, fitness, data, all of it.
You mentioned there were several $trillion that's going to be spent coming soon. The interesting thing and why I wanted to have this conversation is I'm in the family office space, and we've got roughly $10 trillion in capital in family offices. And just to kind of put that in perspective, there's roughly 6.5 trillion globally in the entire hedge fund. So it's bigger than the entire hedge fund universe globally. But the big thing, and I think this is probably true with AI, there's $124 trillion that's going to be transferred from the baby boomers to the next gen in the next 20 years. So we are about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. And all of this money is being transferred, to the next gen, and the next gen in general are much more comfortable with technology than you or I are. So when I talk to a lot of the family offices, every family office knows they need to learn and get up to speed in AI. They don't know how yet. They're thinking they're going to have a director of AI, but they don't know what that means yet. How, in your opinion, like from a job standpoint, paralegals I don't see any use for, period. Title companies I see no use for, period. Even analysts on Wall Street, I can't see a really real value added. What other areas do you see like that this is just going to eviscerate industries?
Yeah, see, and my view is like in the last 100 years plus, there's never been a technology that's been a job detractor, basically like a negative job creator. So it goes back to my view, like, I mean, in the late 90s, especially covering tech, everyone's like, internet, this is done. It's going to change everything. There's going to be no jobs. Yet it created probably the biggest asset in this country, Silicon Valley. I actually view it differently. Like, I think, like, yeah, there'll be job areas where you're clearly are going to see major impacts, but it's also going to create mass amounts of jobs in terms of innovation, engineering, private companies, public factories that are going to be built in terms of innovation centers. And for someone like myself, like I've seen so many areas of this country where a town somewhere in Midwest or Plain States used to have 50,000 people, and now based on like manufacturing leaving or whatever, it's 15,000. And there's a lot of problems in terms of those communities. Now you're going to see more and more, I think, innovation come back to the U.S. Because the first time in 30 years, the U.S. is ahead of China when it comes to tech. I mean, that's the one thing I'd say is like, as someone that travels to Asia 4 times a year, like that's the game changer here. Because this AI revolution, it's not being led by Chinese tech. It's U.S. tech that's leading it.
And you think we're well positioned for the next decade for that to continue?
I think it's part of the reason that we're seeing a lot of some Trump administration and chips and such a hyper focus, national security, everything else, because they recognize there's one chip in the world fueling the AI revolution. It's NVIDIA. You look at the hyperscalers, how they're positioned, Microsoft, Amazon, Google. You look where Oracle is obviously centered. Palantir, in my opinion, potentially could be the most profitable software company, I think, ever. I think where I think it's going to go over the next 8-10 years, being led by U.S. tech. But that's an opportunity, but also it's a challenge too, because where are things made? Asia. Where's supply chain? Asia. Like the reality of bringing that to the U.S., you could bring parts of it, but the reality, it's a fairy tale, right? Just given the labor structure and some of the actually just skill set, right? That's going to need to be rammed from junior high to high school and everything else within this country. So, and look, I, at least personally, like for whatever it's worth, like I talk to so many family offices because they're trying to figure out like how they could position themselves when it comes to a lot of the investment opportunities. And I think look, it's a double-edged sword because just because a company says AI 20 times in a pitch doesn't mean they're AI. And just because they have three people from Stanford doesn't mean they're AI. So you have to separate between what are the ones that actually have the competitive moats versus.
Isn't that similar to in the late '90s when everybody just added .com at the end and they were now .com companies?
Look, I think there's definitely like a much higher radar for that. So I don't feel like a lot of that meets like like the snuff test or whatever. I do think like given the scrutiny of so many of the IPOs, like any IPO that gets out is are going to be some of the elite ones. So I do think investors have better radar for that, and the information flow makes it a lot easier to detect the real ones and the fakes, in my opinion.
What's interesting in my world is that in the family office space, which covers $10 trillion, a lot of the knowledge is coming from the younger generation up rather than the older generation down because they're much more comfortable with technology. And what's interesting is I do think that family offices are going to fundamentally change the way companies are financed going forward. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about how it's going to do it with AI. Today, I believe that I graduated from Northwestern, which I believe is a higher rated school than Penn State, if I'm not mistaken.
And I'm a Northwestern fan.
Okay, well, I'm a Northwestern alum. In any event, so what I think is going to happen is private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the late '80s. I ran a hedge fund. So if you're running a company and you got to report to me or an analyst on Wall Street every 90 days, it's hard to run a company. You're managing earnings. So private equity and venture capital, they used to call it leveraged buyouts, then it became private equity, and it just exploded into a multi-trillion-dollar industry. What's happened though is that the private equity model has gotten so big, it's almost become an AUM game, right? And these funds have gotten too big because the true alpha is created really between the firm about 100 million to about $1 billion. It's not the $25 billion KKR funds that are creating the true alpha. And I believe that as family offices, as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets, family offices are going to really start disrupting the private equity and venture capital. Because
I agree, 100%.
what happens today, and I see it every single day. You see a company, a garage door company in Des Moines, Iowa. A private equity firm buys the company. I could tell you almost for certain within 6 months when they're going to sell it because I know how they're compensated. They're going to sell it probably in about 5 years. They're then going to sell it to a second firm, maybe a strategic, but probably a private equity firm. And I could tell you how long they're going to hold it, probably 5 years. So if you look at the course of, let's just say 20 years, a company is going to change hands 4 times. If you look at the taxes and the friction and the disruption in business to do that versus a family office who can simply buy a company, hold it for 20 years, and let it compound, the results aren't even close. It's objectively a better model. The problem is that very few family offices today can execute. So you've got the Pritzkers and the Crowns, the Gates and the Baumers and the Dells and all these families. They've got a team of 50, 60, 100 people, and they can execute. And they can compete directly with KKR or Blackstone or Carlyle. And objectively, they have a better model. But we're still so early in this. How, in your opinion, is AI going to help the family offices where the money is? I mean, every bank, every law firm, every accounting firm, they're all trying to get into the family office space because that's where the money is. How are our two worlds going to collide?
I think the way that they collide, and remember, I view it less on like how AI is going to impact family offices like every day, like from a technology perspective, and more on the investment side. To me, so many of the smaller family offices are good size, but not like the behemoth red tape ones. They could be nimble on deals. They could get things done quick. They have an eye for maybe where are going to be some of the bigger disruptive themes out there. And I actually, the reason I think family offices are going to play a bigger and bigger role is because a lot, when you think about AI right now, a lot of like the diamonds or, what I've sort of viewed as some of the golden assets, it's going to be 5 engineers building out models, small, way too small for any big investor. And then all of a sudden, on their next rounds, like valuation starts to go, they're going to need more capital. And I think family offices are going to play a bigger and bigger role in those stages that maybe historically, like VCs and PE were always like the foundational investors. I think at least a lot of my conversations, family offices, both in the US as well as in Asia, it's all calling me, trying to figure out opportunities when it
So you
comes
work
to,
with, yeah, you work with a lot of family offices.
yeah.
How are you seeing, how are they investing in AI?
I mean, I can tell you a year ago, I'd get like, from a family office, I'd probably get like one call a month. 6 months ago, it's probably 5 to 10 calls a week. And now it's multiple every day. Because family offices, they're trying to figure out like how do they play in this game? Because this is not look. You could argue like Altman, you think about bubble, and maybe there's aspects of it where there could be some froth. But the reality is, we're it's early innings in terms of where it's playing out. So everyone's trying to figure out how do I play like robotics? How do I play autonomous? How do I play the energy side? How do I play the cybersecurity side? The software piece, the chip side. See, Ron, like I don't view it like it's just like AI is like this. I mean, we talk about in our Ives AI 30, like there's really like 6, 7 buckets. I think family offices are trying to figure out like how do they maybe there's some buckets where okay, like in chips, maybe that's left the station, right? Like there's some opportunities downstream. But when you think about the other derivative areas, everyone's trying to figure out how do they make their bets on who's going to win.
Right. And what's interesting is with family offices, it's what's mind-boggling is you hear the word family office and it means different things to different people. I gave a keynote at Stanford and I had $5 billion families and I said, what is a family office and why did you create it? And there were 5 completely different answers. So in the model, it doesn't work. And only 25% of family offices make it to the second gen, 10 to the third, and 5 to the fourth. There really is no playbook. And what happens is somebody has a liquidity event, the first thing they start doing is investing. And that's like the last thing they should do. They should start with governance and succession and talk to an estate planning attorney and all that stuff. One of the interesting things, and I think where our worlds are going to really collide, is how much money does it take? Does it make economic sense to have a family office? Now, I have been quoted and spoken a lot about this. And I would argue that if you're going to invest in the private markets, private equity, venture capital, and you need a deal team, you need a bare bones minimum of 500 million. You could argue a billion, but let's just say 500 million to do it. There are an awful lot of family offices that do not have even close to that amount of money, that don't have the team to do that. The question is, will family offices now be able to exist at $100 million
Well, that's
by replacing them because you're not going to need the analysts?
well, to me, the opportunity it's actually further downstream. Like you said, like I think family offices, like when you talk about ones that have like 50 million, 100 million, 150, when you look at some of the bets that you're going to be able to take on AI on some of these buckets, I mean, some could be, like obviously, like I know, a handful that have played into robotics and some of the key, what I view as like AI winners in the future. And these are ones that they bet on them early. So I just think like when I think about like the 15, 20, 30 baggers, a lot of them are going to be in this food chain.
Well, you're an analyst. I mean, is energy the play?
Well, I think, look, I mean, we think energy is a huge play because just this all doesn't happen without energy. So it's my view, like there might be energy companies today where their view is traditional grid, traditional power, fuel cells. But I think where investors have maybe like they're starting to kind of see it is like those are going to be some of the hugest derivative plays as you think about what's going to fuel the data centers, what's going to fuel everything. And I think energy and infrastructure are going to play huge roles in here. And to some extent, it's also where like valuations are not ridiculous, right? Sometimes like you don't have that like techish sort of valuation on some of these like non-tech plays, but they actually play well into the whole theme.
So do you think, so right now, let's take a family office that's got 150 million, which in my opinion shouldn't exist. They should be a multifamily office. But I don't judge anybody, but it's not enough money to have it. But with AI, and the main reason is because they don't have the deal team to vet the deals and to source the deals, et cetera. Now with AI, do you need a 10-person deal team, or do you really need fewer people, and the bulk of the work can be done through AI? The ultimate decision is going to be made through the individual, but how disruptive is that going to be?
No, deal team, they're going to be very important, right? Because I do think like AI will not be, at least in the next 3, 4 years, at a level where it could really discern that. Maybe there's components of it, but to me, the reason it's going to play a big role is that like when I think about like an asset and you think about a pizza pie, I think what I'm seeing is more and more family offices are looking to dedicate a much more significant piece to making some of their AI bets. Because I feel like that's how things have dramatically changed, in my opinion, over the last 12 to 18 months.
So how much money? How much money, just in macro, do you see family offices putting into these AI investments, and how much do they need?
I mean, I think like if you think today is basically like really negligible to some extent, like, in terms of like percentages, I think where it's going to trend is that like family offices are going to have 10%, 8 to 10% of their assets in what I would view as like an AI bucket.
You said 8 to 10%.
That's our view.
What would you guess it is currently?
It's less than 1%. I think it's basically
Negligible.
negligible. Because like you said, there's so many people, oh, we don't go there. This is our traditional route. We focus, typical like, equities or whatever, some other derivative assets. It's not and then I think what's starting to happen, I'm seeing is like as more family offices, especially like younger, the more like tech savvy or maybe a little more on the risk curve, they're like, look, I want to get out of that right lane minivan going to 45 miles an hour with a bumper sticker saying my kid was an honor student in third grade. When we get into that left lane in a Ferrari, I'm going to get a speeding ticket every once in a while, but I want to make some bets in that tech AI left lane.
So do you think then that, let's go back to the mid 90s when the internet was just starting, and I don't know what this AOL thing was, or the how to get online. It is, everything was all new. How long is it going to take for, if AI is, it almost seems like every single day there's something new coming out in AI. It's growing faster than we can possibly
Exponentially. Yeah.
fathom. It's grown exponentially. How far ahead is that going to get of the people? In other words, when a technology becomes so important and so powerful, but most people don't understand it, that's going to cause some issues. So what do you see, like, from an educational standpoint? I mean, I know some of the schools have AI.
Hmm?
University of Chicago Booth has AI
Universities.
program.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a big trend?
Oh yeah, that's gonna, like, I might speak probably 15, 20 universities a year. Like, number one, like that is like, that's the area, especially with like so many of these universities, like there's a lot of red tape to get things done. This, like, everyone has their hand in the pot. I think there's like a rip the band-aid off moment where you're seeing universities being like, we have to teach AI, not just, I'm not talking engineers, developers, computer science majors, but every vertical. Because it's my view, from a student that's at school right now, like AI is gonna be no different than like economics, like modeling, spreadsheet capability. I mean, I view it as kind of that type skill set, from a just being able to code and do developer type of skill set, whether it's finance, marketing, government, retail, whatever it may be.
So we're blowing up on questions from the audience. So let's just take a question from the audience.
Yeah, great.
I'll put it on the screen. And again, this is one that I'm asked a lot. And again, I'm a layperson when it comes to the AI. But how far ahead is the U.S. in front of China?
I mean, years ahead. Like, a lot of it just comes down to like, Nvidia is 2 to 3 years ahead of Huawei. Now, I could argue like AMD is clearly going to narrow the gap. You think about the hyperscalers versus what I'll view like, the core China big tech plays, Baba, Baidu, everyone else. They're 1 2 years at least ahead in China, and the whole build out that we see when it comes to the global AI revolution, like in the Middle East, it's all going to be U.S. tech. Like, that speaks to my point where I'm like, why I've been so bullish, the last few years in U.S. tech, because there's no other game in town. Now, okay, like if you like massive tariffs, chips, want to try to have them built here, yeah, you could cut tech off the knees here. That's what happened Liberation Day, early April. But we spent a bunch of time in DC. I think cooler heads will prevail, where they basically realize like, okay, we can't do that. That would be giving China a huge advantage. Just do a pay to play model, right? 15% to the house, White House. You want to sell in China? Fine. You're whatever, your third, fourth chip. What's crazy is like, if you think about like Nvidia's like fourth best chip is, I think, modest to significantly ahead of what Huawei has. That's that's how far ahead. Because now, like when you look like what Nvidia is doing, they're now focused on like physical AI. Because I think that's the holy grail. Holy grail is robotics, autonomous. That's that to me. Like when we talk, everything else we're talking about is like table stakes. At least right now, when it comes on the consumer side. To me, that is what's going to be the mind blower.
So let me ask you this: what's the deal with the chips? I mean, what goes into them?
Look, a lot of the chips, when you think about what's been built, it's not the actual hardware. I mean, they basically have built the software models inside the chips can't be replicated. I mean, if you look, their chips are basically able to take data that's never been able to be analyzed. Take that data, and it basically, the power that's probably 30 to 40x today, analyze that data, deploy it, and then enable software company to build use cases on that chip, on essentially that engine. Without NVIDIA, it doesn't work, but it doesn't work without a hyperscaler like Microsoft, Amazon, Google. It also doesn't work if you don't have the software use cases. That's why Palantir, right, went from, $10, $12 stock to where it is today.
Okay, I'm getting blown up. Literally getting blown up with questions. I have another question from the audience. I'll just put it on the screen here.
Yeah.
So how does the U.S. power infrastructure compare to Europe and Asia? And I think it's a really important question.
Yeah. I mean, look, U.S. power is way behind where Asia is when it comes to just the overall power ecosystem. I would say like China, specifically parts of Korea, are much better positioned when it comes to power than US, which is my view. Like that's why like I'm a big believer it's going to be about nuclear. Like we are a huge proponent. That's why, Aqua being one of our favorite names, the only way that this is all going to work is nuclear. Now, like, you're going to have like grids and utilities.
Wait, you think the only way this works is nuclear?
I think nuclear has to play a huge role in where this go, and I think there's an understanding, even within the Beltway, that's the reality. I think this is going to be. Now again, nuclear, as we all know, it's great as long as it's not in my backyard.
Yeah.
But I believe nuclear is going to, and I think like, look, you're going to have a lot of these traditional utility grid companies that they're basically going to have to massively transform their infrastructure over the next few years.
So I'm getting bombarded with questions from the audience. Got another question. Your perspective on the long-term quality of the fixed income assets coming from data center assets.
Mm-hmm. Look, I believe those are probably some of the best assets out there, just given the, what I view as the sustainability of them, the use cases. What I basically mean is like a lot of these fixed assets have gotten built, and you basically thought there was one reason that you're building the fixed assets. And even on the data centers, maybe there was 30% capacity, 40% capacity. If even comparing it to like .com days, everything built out during .com bubble, from underground to really from an infrastructure perspective, I could argue like never really got utilized till now. So it's funny to almost like put them all together. I think a lot of these fixed assets, a lot of the value is going to be in a lot of these assets.
Now, one of the when we talked about doing this, you're the Tesla guy. Can you tell me the story about Elon on Twitter? I know it third hand, but tell me that story.
You mean in terms of like just him buying Twitter and the whole thing?
Yeah.
I mean, look, like, and just knowing like Musk and obviously being such a big proponent of, of Musk and Tesla and his view, because Musk has a much longer view game, and I think he viewed it as like he needed Twitter to ultimately, as a messaging mechanism, that was going to play a role in a broader sort of build out that he was going to do from SpaceX to Tesla and everything else. Obviously, he strongly disagreed with everything Twitter was doing, cut 85% of the workers. But, politics aside, when you think about what Musk is building, especially when it comes to like physical AI and robo-taxis and just the future. Look, Twitter at the time, right, seemed like a very sort of head-scratching deal, but the way it's actually starting to play out more and more, it does make more and more sense relative to Musk's view of the future of AI and how everything's sort of going to be integrated when it comes to robotaxis and robotics and humanoids.
Now, one of the things that I see a lot, Shut Up Dan, the Shut Up Dan post. Talk to me about that.
No, that was, I mean, look, like, and just, Elon being a huge supporter of him, that was really me criticizing him. And I knew he'd be, not happy and the board wouldn't be happy. And obviously, took exception, shut up Dan on, to my post. So it got a lot of focus. But look, it speaks to the way, like, I cover companies. Like, as a big believer in Tesla, Musk getting into politics is not a positive for Tesla. It's a negative. And right now we're in an AI arms race, and Musk needs to be a wartime CEO, not focus on politics.
So we got a question. We got a question from the audience specifically about Tesla. So I'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Tesla robot that they're looking to release? Because also, if you look at what they're doing in the warehousing and how they fulfill orders, to me, that's just like science fiction. But talk to me about that.
I think Optimus is going to be bigger than the whole Tesla story today.
You do.
That's why my view is like selling cars and 10 million cars by next year on the road. The way that we get to a $2 trillion market cap, and I believe that that's by a conservative, is it's not even a question in our view that they will win the robotics race, because the scale that they have, and ultimately it's the humanoid robots. Like, it's like when I look at Optimus in the future, it's going to be from factories to on the consumer side. Jensen, look, Tesla and NVIDIA are the two best physical AI players in the world, in my opinion. So, and I think Autonomous and Optimus they're going to be I think the game changers for Tesla going forward.
I've been asking a ton of questions to you about AI. Any questions you have regarding family offices, because our worlds are colliding?
Yeah. I mean, my question to you is like, how do you change the culture within some family offices to make them more, I'm not necessarily nimble, but to go further down the risk curve or further up the risk curve when it comes to so much of the innovation that's happening in this space, but maybe it doesn't fit in their typical DNA?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And with family offices, again, you've got the older generation, matriarch or patriarch, and then the next gen. And the next gen is very fluent, or much more fluent, in talking about AI or these tech stocks than the older generation. Things like impact investing, the older generation didn't really get. It came from the younger generation on up, not the other way around. But I think that with the amount of money that's being transferred, $124 trillion, a lot of these, I'm going to call them kids, are I didn't know about Bitcoin until 2020, maybe something like that. And yet there were these kids who were investing it in 2013, 2014. And in the family offices, what's interesting is there's almost, it's not an argument, but the younger generation really wants to go all in, or not all in, but go much further into your world. The older generation is still, wait a minute, I've seen this
Sure.
video
Seen
before.
this story before.
So what's your thought on that? As far as,
Look, I get it. I get it. If you're like a 60, 70-year-old, you've been through it, been on the Wall Street 40 years, family off, super successful, the whole thing. You're like, oh, I've seen this play out many times. Like, I know how this is going to go. And I understand that concept. I think where it's misguided or wrong, whatever, it's just like it's underestimating. Like this is a once in a generation, a multi-generation technology trend. It just happens that we're living in it. So the comparisons I view as basically like apples to oranges relative to what's happened here, because we're essentially building out what I kind of view as the new economy between tech as well as my view of crypto. So, and I think that's like a lot of the conversations, right? Like it's hard to change. But look, the technology trends, they're mind-boggling. Like in terms of just everything that's happening. And these companies, it's like when we had like the DeepSeek moment, like in early January, everyone's like, that's it, bubble, they're doing it for 6 million. Why are these companies spending? It's going to cause all this capex reset. Okay, now look, the reality is DeepSeek was using NVIDIA next gen chips, right? They were basically, stolen through Singapore. And instead of 6 million, they were spending close to 1 billion. So the true story came out, it's a lot different, right? But it did highlight just the nervousness where any little thing, and you've seen it this week, Altman, Meta, there was like an MIT thing on AI, everyone's like, that's it, it's there. But look, it's like it's just gonna be part of it. Like it's like you're gonna have these moments, but I think you cannot deny where this is all heading.
Well, let's talk about education and community, because I think that's key. And in the family office space, what family offices would do is they typically go to these family office conferences, and the whole model is kind of a pay to play model. It's not really ideal. So we created at Stanford, now at University of Chicago
Oh yeah,
booth.
you told me that's the you're doing University of Chicago. Yeah.
And I think that what we're seeing is there needs to be programs that educate the younger generation who are going to go into these family offices eventually. But you're going to get look, Stanford and Booth were the first, but I can guarantee you in 5 to 7 years, major schools going to have this.
I mean, Ron, my wife and I, we fund the thing at Penn State and AI Innovation Center that we did last year. When I speak at a lot of universities, like that's a big thing that I'm preaching. Like when I speak, because I view it, it's almost like a frustration sometimes. Like I'll go to schools and they'll be like, "Whoa, we're worried about the ethics with AI, and that's a concern." I'm like, "Yeah, kids are here 4 years. You need to give them the skill set." Like, whoa, what happens if they're a computer science? I'm like, no, it's not about that. It's about if you're a student going into university, you need this. Like, it's not a question. And I think it's like a sensitive topic for me, but it's like a passionate topic because I agree 100%. When you do like family office and like, it's amazing how you can like move the needle. Like so many of these universities, like they're trying to do things, but just given the nature, they move like a turtle, right? So slow, and they have to analyze it. Yet kids are there 4 years. Like they got to come out with a skill set.
So are you going to, in 10 years, are kids going to be able to get degrees in AI? What's that going to look like?
Oh, I think 100%. I think that's going to be like it's going to be heading down that path. But I would actually view it as like, regardless of the vertical, financial, real estate, this, law, whatever, it's going to need to be a skill set for each area. Healthcare, like it's my view. Like if you're like a nurse, a doctor in a hospital, you're going to have some understanding of this technology because it's going to play a role.
Well, I have a friend who's a radiologist, and now AI is they're actually reading the X-rays, and now he has to do it at a much quicker. To me, the AI, I think where I'm most optimistic about the role that AI can play in the world is really with the healthcare. With
Totally.
I mean, it's a hard question to ask, but do you think AI? It's going to certainly accelerate, but in the next 30 years, are we going to find cures for a lot of these diseases?
Well, that's the
Yeah.
look. That's the hope, right? I mean, that's like, you know, I was at a dinner a few weeks ago with like a few CEOs, like major hospitals, and this was like a big thing that came up that we were talking about. Like, it's like that's the future. Like, obviously, in terms of how it's going to be used in pharma, and a lot of it's data driven, right? Like, in other words, like this technology could do things that a human just doesn't have the capacity to do. But there's about like 50, 40%, 60% in some ways of the data that's never been accessed. Because that data was basically never able to be cracked. Now it can be.
Well, tell me also about, and your shirt is actually muted for typical for what I usually see. Tell me about TV. How did that start for you? We've seen you on CNN, at CNBC, Bloomberg, and you do a phenomenal job. Love the colorful jackets. How did the colorful jacket? How did that thing start?
Yeah. And I started doing TV like early 2000s, maybe, like, in terms of like that, just covering tech stocks. And that was something I enjoyed doing. And I think it was really about like getting the message out, like in a manner that I think people were able to really like digest. I think over the years, like anything else, like it kind of it takes on a life of its own. Look, I've always dressed funky. This is going back to like my Long Island days as a kid. When I started, when I got into Wall Street, late 90s, I'd wear like some color here and there. And then I just kept kind of stepping up. And then eventually kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and kind of went down like total different paths. So it's been fun. Launched clothing line 2 weeks ago with a well-known Brooklyn designer, Snow Milk, danivesclothing.com if you want to see it. And it's fun, man. Look, I mean, the way I view it is just kind of like I never take myself too seriously. A lot of haters out there, I get it. But I just enjoy it. And I try to also, the way I dress is similar to the way I call stocks, right? I'm not sitting there with Brooks Brothers Pinot Noir on the spreadsheet and saying stocks are expensive. That's never been my MO.
It's interesting. I'm also I can't get away with it, right? So I'm almost the antithesis of cool. At least I've been told that by my daughters and many of my friends.
I
So,
think you're cool.
well, I'm not objectively, and I'm trying to get away with it. But when I saw what you're doing with shirts, I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I'm like, actually, that's a pretty good idea. So I'm actually going to be starting a clothing line too. And my producer, Cody, who's on, Cody, if you could just pop on for a second so we can see, this is going to be what my new clothing line looks like. And it's more colorful. And Cody, you see the collars and everything. I'm not comparing it to yours, and I'm not
I
trying to be competitive, but I'm also going to be starting a clothing line that I can't
Dude,
wear.
I love it. That's epic.
So I guess to wrap up, we've got about 5 minutes or so. Um, in
And
I
also, I
like
just want to say thanks for like the great questions and like there's been like just great dialogue.
No, I think it's been great in the audience. Well, look, I love watching you on TV, and it's everyone asks about AI. It's right. I remember what was the movie with Matthew Broderick? War Games. Remember
Oh
War
yeah,
Games?
of
That
course.
was like when it took over and then the computer started thinking. But that's actually really happening now in real
And
time.
also remember a lot of Palantir's beginnings. The reality is like really, in three-letter agencies in the military.
So I like to look out long term. I mean, one of the advantages family offices have over private equity is we don't have to look at a
Sure.
5-year thing and then flip it in 5 years and flip it. So let's go out 20 years. Okay. Macro question. what are the big macro changes that you're seeing in AI? The things that we're starting to see now, but cab drivers don't exist. It's now just autonomous cars. What are some of those big macro things that we're going to see?
Look, I think robotics to me is going to be a huge part of the future. Like I think if there's like one big theme, it's that. Like I'm a believer not just in robotics, but in humanoid robotics. Essentially, they call it chips that human-like robots. And I think there's always going to be like unintended consequences, but we're essentially creating a world where, like, if you thought about post World War II, okay, no one ever could have imagined the life that you were living in the 60s, 70s, and especially in the 80s. That to me is kind of where we're going into. It's going to be technology driven, and I think it's being underestimated what those trends are going to look like. I think the biggest thing, the biggest constraint is going to be power, energy. Clearly, like government or regulatory, right? Just given how quick the technology is heading. And I think the third thing is obviously going to be like cost, right? In other words, like you need the cost to come down, but that's going to come down at scale. But that to me is like the future, the way I see it. And that's why like Zuckerberg is like wartime CEO, Musk, Altman, Nadella, Jensen, because they see where it's going, because they see it firsthand.
Well, Dan, I could talk to you for hours. You're a brilliant guy. We appreciate your time.
No, thank you so much for having me. Seriously.
So it's been a pleasure. And anyone watching, where should they follow you online, on X or where?
Yeah, so X, Dives Tech, or on LinkedIn, and hit me too if you have any questions too.
Got it. And for family offices, we've got familyofficeworldmedia.com if you want to learn more about family offices. But again, to everybody, I really appreciate you tuning in. And before we close, I just wanted to have one more ending shot of my new line of clothing. Cody, if you could just jump back on for just a minute, because I want to leave people. I'm sorry, Cody, but I want to leave people with this. I see my fabric looks cooler than yours, like material wise. I think my collar looks better, and we'll see how it goes. So I wish you good luck.
Dude, I'm a buyer of it, man.
Thank you. Great having you, Dan.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. All right, great to see you.